Hey everybody, CJ here, back with another episode of The Fling. This is a podcast without a strategy, agenda, or an end game. We just want to have fun conversations with interesting people, and that's why I'm super excited to have Sara Heidinger as my guest today. Sara, I've kind of spent a little bit, a couple of weeks at least, trying to track you down. So I'm glad that you agreed to this. I don't know if it was reluctantly or not, but I'm glad nonetheless. A lot of fun stuff to talk about with Sara. So, Sara runs my favorite coffee shop. She also works for my state senator. And a number of years ago, she was also my wedding photographer. So, this is a very diverse and interesting person. And I'm really excited to help her share her story. I think there's a lot of cool things we can talk about. So, first of all, Sara, thank you for joining me. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. I mean, there is no other place to be than right here, right now. As they say.
That is true, especially in this time, right?
I know. I know. There's a lot of being here wherever here is for you. I've
Yeah.
like where I am right now, I've logged a lot of hours sitting
Yeah.
right there in this office. So
I moved into where I live now in December, so not too long before the pandemic hit, and it was interesting. Like, luckily, I really love it, but yeah,
whereabouts are you? Like what neighborhood?
I live in the first ward.
You're in Blue.
Yeah,
Right?
so I've come and gone a few times over the years, but I was happy to be here during the pandemic and close to my family and stuff, but I also was happy to maybe not have roommates
Mhm.
and that stuff during this weird time. So
Yeah, I
makes
bet.
working easier.
Well, let's start there. I mean, I obviously I know that you're from the ward, and I know that you have a lot of pride in the ward. And I think that in recent years, with some of the new development we've seen in Buffalo, you've seen, whether it come up from South Buffalo or trickle down a little bit from downtown, you're starting to see some attention and a little bit of reinvestment back into the area. Maybe not as much as like a Larkin district or something like that. But you're seeing cool things happening there. But you're somebody who's like been there from the beginning, strong advocacy for it. And then I don't know what was it 3 years ago when you opened up Undergrounds right in the first ward.
Yeah, it's actually been 4.5 years. Crazy to
Wow.
believe, but yeah. Yeah, I was born here and I spent most of my life here. I left around college, and I lived in different parts of Buffalo, lived in New York City. And then when I moved back, I just really wanted to, my parents still live here, and I wanted to participate in making sure the neighborhood didn't take a turn for the worst. It was kind of like on a hinge at that point where it could have gone either way. We had a lot of absentee landlords from out of state, out of the country, that just weren't caring for their property. Um, so I moved back, and I missed having a walkable community. So I thought, like, it'd be nice to have a coffee shop to walk to. We have plenty of bars to walk to, that's for
Mhm.
sure. But so that's kind of how the coffee shop came about. And I was on the board. I'm still on the board at the Old Versailles Community Center, where I met my one business partner, Bill, and he also felt the need for some walkability in the community, which I think it's grown, but it's still lacking. We don't have a ton of things we can walk
Sure.
to down
There's
here.
room to grow for sure.
Yeah, so it's definitely like an interesting time, because although reinvestment and development is really great, there's a turning point where that will change the shape of the neighborhood, I think, in a negative way. So it might not, from an outsider's perspective, like, people probably want like cool condos everywhere, but like, I lost my photography studio that I had been in for 6 years because that building's turning into apartments. There was about 25 of us in there, all artists, that got kicked out. And so, it's I always joke that I'm like riding on the gentrification bus and getting run over by it at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So I kind of sit on both sides of it, which is an interesting perspective to have for sure.
That's a really interesting perspective to have. I would say, for the most part, I don't know. Maybe I sit on neither. I don't know, or maybe if I think I'm neither, maybe that's a sign I'm on one. I'm not really sure.
Oh,
Gentrification is a very interesting topic. It's a double-edged sword. You look at a city like Buffalo, and you say, okay, this is a city that's, let alone specific neighborhoods, a city that's, could really use more investment. But at the same time, right, you have those consequences. It does kind of tear at the fabric of certain neighborhoods and push people away, so yeah, that's a good point. It's not all good, and I know what studio you're talking about. We went in there on my wedding day to take photos
yeah,
of the rain. So
that's true.
I've
Yeah.
been. Um, so I'm sorry to hear that. I was not aware of that.
Yeah. Luckily, I landed on my feet, fortunately, not very far from here. But it's interesting. I think there's plenty of ways to develop areas and not forget about the people that live there or change it completely so that those people can't enjoy those things. So I say this, I was on some of the committees for the river line that's supposed to be coming to the neighborhood. And a big part of the reason that I've given so much of my time to that is because I think it's important that those things get developed for us and with us instead of around us and to us. And so I think that even people with the best intentions, if they come into a space and they don't have a connection to the people in the space, it's really hard to create something with those people. If you're just,
Yeah.
even if you're trying to do it really hard for them, if you're not getting feedback from them, it's really hard to make that happen. So, I've spent a
Would
lot of
you
time.
would you be willing to elaborate on what you think makes for good planning and placemaking?
Sure. I mean, I am by no means an expert. This is all just kind of my um personal opinion, I guess, as a resident and a business owner. But I think so for me, when I look at the ward, it's like the reasonable rent cost, it's a safe environment, right? Like a lot of family history. And so I'm not one of those people that thinks like it should remain only the people that are from here. I think new blood and new families and stuff is the kind of thing that ignites neighborhoods and makes them go round. And so I always thought maybe we would avoid gentrification, because the cool thing about a lot of people that move down here is it seems like they're trying to become part of the thread of that history instead of ruining it. But that's taken a turn lately. So like a developer's bought up people's houses now, and the plan is to actually tear down these houses and put up condos. And for me, that's kind of like a clear line of when I think it's gone too far. Because like it overall, the city of Buffalo, right? Like the housing market's insane and great right now, whatever. But through the years, our neighborhood has got less dense because they've torn down houses. And so you have houses with lots next to them, and a lot of like I have an empty lot right next to my house. Um, so in theory, those things are great, right? More space. It's almost like living in maybe like a small town in the middle of the city. But the idea of a city is
Density.
density, right? So I guess in
Yeah.
that sense, like a condo comes to mind, right? You create density, you create more people. But I think when you start tearing down, like they're not tearing down decrepit homes, they're buying up homes that people live in and having them move out and tearing them down. And I think that's, to me, changes when you're drastically changing the scope of a neighborhood. I think that's when you've gone too far.
Yeah.
And it's when it's not with the interest, they're not building these condos with the interest or hopes that anyone from the neighborhood's going to want to move into them or can afford to move into them. It's your, all of a sudden people are paying attention to the waterfront, right? Like we've had this waterfront our whole lives, through the work of like water keepers and certain government officials. Like there's been a lot of work done to make it usable and enjoyable. So now everyone's looking at it and it's like, oh, who doesn't want to live on a condo looking over the river, but I just think when you lose kind of sight of the footprint of the actual neighborhood that already exists, it's you've gone too far. So I think through like creating structure that people can buy the homes they've been renting is important. I think the big thing that we don't talk about a lot in Buffalo is like it's like keep Buffalo a secret. It's fun, it's kitschy, but we haven't really created a ton of jobs, right? Like we haven't created a better education system. So what we're doing is just building condos, it feels like, or
And
putting
shifting
apartments.
people around.
Yeah. And so what are we doing? Like my coffee shop's created I don't know, 10 to 12 jobs, right? And they're okay jobs, right? Like the people are living off them, but I haven't created careers. Like we're not establishing these bases where people can live and work and raise a family on these incomes. So for me, it's like that's all got to be part of the puzzle, right? Like we can build a million condos and we can build a million apartments, but if we're not figuring out how to find people income to live in those apartments, and I'm talking about the people that live here, like sure we can import a bunch of people and that's great. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having both worlds. I just think it's the side of the coin that a lot of people don't talk about when we talk about this regrowth in Buffalo, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think I agree with you too. I have no experience in urban planning, but I've been interested in it for a while. Actually, ever since moving to Buffalo from Connecticut, and reading Buffalo News, Buffalo Business First, Buffalo Rising, and really understanding you know, what it means to live in a city. I'd never lived in a city before. I grew up in the suburbs, and then I went to
Right.
school at St. Bonaventure in a tiny little town, and then I came up here 12 and a half years ago, and I've only ever lived in the city, and I've loved it the whole time. And but living in a different environment compelled me to understand it more. And
Yeah.
I've done a lot of reading about what makes for vibrant neighborhoods, specifically to the point of density, of accommodating for pedestrians over cars,
Right.
and a lot of other things. And everything you just said kind of, I would say, aligns with what I've absorbed, to know to be true about urban neighborhoods. And but at the same time, you created a business in your neighborhood that is providing jobs, and
Yeah.
to me, it must feel so rewarding. Even though it sounds like you're somebody who you're not really all the way satisfied yet, where you see there's more that needs to be done, whether you do it or somebody else does it,
Right.
right? And you seem like somebody who's constantly pushing. But having grown up in a neighborhood and say, this needs this, and doing that and providing investment and providing jobs has to be so rewarding. I got to admit, I really admire it. I really admire
Thank
it.
you. I appreciate that. It's definitely, you know, there's definitely days where it feels very rewarding, and we have had an amazing staff over the 4.5 years, and being able to create an environment where we nurture people to go on and follow their dreams. A couple of our employees have gone on to open their own businesses in their own communities. And so that to me, especially as a woman empowering other women in business, and just helping provide either some insight or tools, or helping them find their own path, is probably the most rewarding part about it. And then too, it's weird now because of COVID, but there before this, seeing little kids from the neighborhood come in, my cousin's son comes in, and he's been coming in since he was very little. And I think that'll be a tradition for him for the rest of his life, right? And that'll be a place that he went with his parents and came to for breakfast. And I think back to there was a restaurant called Mary's when I was little in the first ward, and we went there, and I had my own glass, and it had a Doberman on it, and got to go behind the counter sometimes. And it's this memory that I cherish. So a lot of when we were talking about the coffee shop, it's more than just creating a place, right? It's creating a community. And I recently had a quick conversation with one of the guys from Cookies and Cream in South Buffalo, and it's the same kind of thing, right? It's we can think of a million things that we need, right? Walkability wise, but the part I think you can't build, the part that the community builds, is that community. So when when you walk into Undergrounds and you sit at the counter and we talk about whatever for a half hour while you're having coffee, there's that part. You can't predict that part, right? It kind of happens. You can create the perfect wallpaper, or you can create an atmosphere, right? But the energy in the community, I think, is the part that really warms my heart when I kind of take a step back and think about it and feel it. So knowing that, that'll be the place that my little cousin might want to go to when he comes home from college, right? Or
That's
I have
amazing.
an older cousin that goes to school in Duquesne. And like every time she comes home, her and her girlfriend like come down from Orchard Park and they get a certain sandwich and like, so creating kind of establishing memories is really interesting to me as well.
Yeah, you're creating nostalgia.
Yeah,
I
some
mean,
way.
I'm already nostalgic for it, and I still come by a lot and get my takeout order.
Yeah. We
Um,
were really hoping to open up indoor seating again like this week, but we just decided it doesn't make any sense now with the restrictions changing.
yeah,
So
that's got to be, and that's a good segue. So, what's it been like operating technically a restaurant
yeah.
um, during COVID?
The beginning was pretty wild, because you have no idea no one had any idea what to do at any point of any of this, right? Like
No.
we're all just kind of
Does
winging it.
anybody still really know?
No, I clearly not. So I think the first thing was like survival, right? Like what's the absolute kind of plan that we need to create to survive? And so for us, unfortunately, it was laying off our whole staff and then having the owners work. And so I have a full-time job for the assembly. So I was only available for a certain amount of hours early in the morning. And then my other business partners kind of had to take over in the middle, like from there on. But more so it's like this digital component that we were pretty fortunate to have in place already. Like we had launched an app about 2 or 3 months before COVID hit, and then, we were easily able to add on online ordering to our website and phone ordering. So just being able to pivot very quickly into a new model was, I think, really important for us. And like everyone's safety is number one. So it's like I'm not going to have my staff be working in the middle of a pandemic if I'm not willing to do it. So our first line was we work first, and then when it becomes a little bit safer and we can kind of gauge what this might look like, we'll bring them back. And that's what we did for about 2 months. So it was a very long 2 months of just making sure you're posting on social media every day so everyone knows that you're open, and which was probably crucial to business at that point. The amount of people that stayed coming in and ordering because we posted on social media and they saw it. And we had the best customers. Weirdly, we gained a bunch of new customers because we for a little bit were the only ones. Like Starbucks had closed for a while, and I
I
think some.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
You have the best customers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so it was just a lot of kind of literally week by week. Like, what do we, okay, this week we're going to do this, we're going to shorten hours. And then, next week we're going to shorten hours more. And so we kept reducing things. And then we hit a point where we could go back up. And, a lot of it was thankful to the PPP loan. We got one of those. And so we were able to kind of lighten the stress load a little bit and bring some staff back. And we brought our staff back piece by piece. And even that, like it was, giving them the option to not come back if they wanted to, if they were scared, or, if anyone had a compromised immune system or any of those things. So kind of working. And, I tried to stay in touch with them as a team, like send a message every couple days, send them to, like, I had some yoga studios that were giving free classes. So making sure that they're aware of like these things, because your mental health is super important. So, at one point, New York State had launched like a 1-800 number for you could call and talk to counselors. So just kind of like giving them all of those tools because they're all isolated at home. And some of them live here alone, like their families are in other cities. So, you feel like I had a responsibility to take care of these people. And so it's like one hand, you're trying to make sure the business stays afloat. And the other hand, you've created this little family. And so you have to take care of them. And so we did like Zoom happy hours and just try to keep in touch with everyone to make sure that everyone was, in a good space and didn't need anything. We gave them all like free meals through COVID so they could all come get one meal a day or order it. Because, I until very recently lived very paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. So if the world had shut down when I worked at Swanee House as a bartender, I would have had no money saved to pay my bills the next following week. So just taking that all into consideration. And now our our takeout model has proven to sustain this so far. We're going to stick with that. We expanded a little, like we took over Duende at Silo City's kitchen on Bills Day. Every Bills game, we were doing Undergrounds out of their kitchen.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then we're also doing Monday through Friday now, we're doing breakfast and lunch out of their kitchen because the construction for the apartments over there is happening. So it's like weird in the middle of all this, we're like semi-expanding, but also every day, like holding your breath a little bit, like to see what happens next.
I mean, for what it's worth, what most of the time when I come in, it seems, even though it's all takeout, it seems to be moving quickly. It seems like you have 2 or 3 people, and they're making sandwiches, they're making drinks. It's like it's moving relatively quickly. I don't know if that's just me, but
yeah, I mean, like orders take a little longer than normal. We're still following, like we have 50% staffing capacity. We never came back from that. So there's definitely, whereas 4 people might have been working on a weekend, there's 2, sometimes 3. So I think our customers have been very understanding of that. Like sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get stuff, but it's pretty busy. Like now with the online orders, like you'll walk in and there might be 7 orders waiting for you when you come in the door. So it's a different world for sure. It's weird, like you get used to it, but it's the part that I love the most, the community, right? That's the piece that's missing. So you get these moments where people come in and you catch up quickly, say hello, but you're trying to make sure there's only 4 to 6 people in the space at a time. So it's like a very shattered version of what it was. But I think, someday we'll go back to
we
the
100% will someday.
yeah, someday.
I feel very comfortable committing to that.
Yes.
No way.
Same.
So you talked. It's so funny, right? Because we start talking about being from the war, and then starting your coffee shop, and like some of the implications that have on the community at large. So just to hear your natural transition into some of those thoughts makes it not very surprising that you got into politics, right? You work for my state senator, Patrick Burke.
Assemblyman.
Assemblyman.
That's okay.
You work for my state assemblyman, Patrick Burke, and
Yes.
tell me about that. I mean, I think within the last year or so you started. Tell me about like what compelled you to do that, and what are you doing now?
I've known Assemblyman Burke for quite a while, and he, I think, is a really decent man. I'm sorry, can you hold on 1 second?
Go ahead.
I think I forgot I ordered takeout.
Oh, go get
And
your
it's
takeout. Get your takeout.
Oh,
I'll entertain the crowd.
oh, hi.
This is a really official podcast. I'm gonna check my email.
You too. Hey. You can hear
That's okay. Dogs are
the
allowed.
dogs barking.
Dogs are
Yeah. They are. Okay, they'll be happy to hear that. They're not even mine. I'm dog sitting.
Oh, you know who?
Hey, I'm listening, CJ. Get in here. Get in.
So
This is like
the first
crazy.
the first dog that was ever on the podcast was Casey Kelly's dog. Because
okay.
I told you that she did my mural.
Yes.
Right. So, so I had her on to like talk about that, and I like showcased it. So we talked about that and her, her transition from like being a designer at White Bike to now teaching, and so that was really cool.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
So the assembly office, I've known Pat for a long time, and I trust him. I think he's smart, and the opportunity just kind of presented itself at the right time.
So what's your role?
I was director of community relations, but I got a promotion recently, and so I'm director of special projects. So I'm doing kind of a mixed bag of things. Like right now, I'm working on some video content to kind of get some messaging out to the community and make them more aware of, like there's a loan right now called New York Forward, and it's for small businesses, and it's pretty like it's a good percentage rate. And I think in a time of need, a lot of businesses are in need right now. So like I'm going to create this week a video that highlights that and gives more information about it. So trying to make information more accessible to people, I would say, is probably a big part of my new role. Um, so it's more of like a communications kind of marketing side of things. Whereas when I first took the job, I dealt with constituents every day. So I answered the phone and worked with constituents on problems that they may have. And up until March, it was like, I don't know, you needed a stoplight fixed on your street and you didn't know who to call. And we might not be those people, but we would connect them to those people.
Yeah,
So
that's
just
cool. I would
any,
imagine that job would have like a mix of like really great people and really like appropriate problems, and probably a lot of um, man, this is not a reason to call 911 type of thing. Um,
yeah, for 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And then the pandemic hit, and it was really just, I was able to help close to 400 people get their unemployment cases worked out. But it was pretty stressful. It was one of the most taxing things I've ever done because of the emotional component.
yeah,
There was a lot of people that didn't know what to do or who to call and didn't have anything. And um, I am certainly not an expert in, that kind of crisis service. So I have a really amazing team. Like Pat has an amazing team that I get to work with every day. It was interesting. Like we had to shut our office down and kind of figure things out just like everyone else did.
yeah,
Um, so while you're trying to like help lead and be available for people, figuring out how we all do our job at the same time was,
yeah. That's got to be hard because here you are, just like everybody else. This thing
yeah,
happens, it's sprung upon you. You're trying to figure it out, you're trying to get answers, but yet you're the people that everybody expects to have answers. So it's got to be like doubly hard, I would think. Right? Like, don't you like people
yeah,
call people like, all right, our leader, like our like, give us like, what are we doing? Right? Where it's like, I can feel like confused, frustrated, distressed, depressed, anything. I can feel all of those things and also not have to be accountable to a community, right? That's looking for answers too. So
yeah. I think that's one of the things that makes Pat a really great leader. He has the ability to kind of think really fast on his feet and make decisions in moments that are really difficult to make those decisions in, you know.
that's great.
Yeah.
Good for you guys. Now, I have another question. So, um, between TV shows and movies, and I just think how much our country tends to follow national politics. Um, we kind of have an idea, or the average person has at least some semblance of an idea of what happens after an election is won, and then the campaign is over, and it's time to start governing, right? Like I'm a fan of The West Wing. I got my Bartlett for America mug. So like I
Yeah.
remember when Jed Bartlett wins re-election. Now he's all right. We're talking about this. We're doing this, right? We kind of have a somewhat of a frame, as much of a frame of reference for it as we can, not living in
Yeah.
that world, right? You guys. Just won re-election last
Yeah.
week. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so now, the job is to kind of set the agenda for 2 years. So what is the process of? I'm not asking you to tell me everything, but like, how does your work change going from campaigning to governing, right? And how much are you excited to look forward to that? I've heard members of Congress complain that they don't like how the system works because they have to spend too much time of their day, even while they're governing, soliciting donations and things like that.
Yeah.
But like how does that transition work, and what are you excited about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like that's a big problem in our political system. I think like campaign finance reform is something that I'm personally very passionate about because you do, obviously, and you can't campaign while you're working. So those are two very separate things. Like they have to be completely separate,
Mhm.
um, which means you have to just find more time in your day to do both things. So it's nice to kind of switch your focus back to just one thing. Or for me, for me, it's still like four things, but it's
Yeah,
one
right.
thing
Are you
there.
still doing photography, by the way?
I do, yeah. I have my studio.
Photography business? That's crazy.
Yeah. You know what though? Like, I don't have kids. Like, you have three kids, right? So that,
Yeah,
like,
I
think of
think.
all the
Yeah.
time you spend, like, bathing them and reading to them and taking them somewhere and picking them up from somewhere. And,
Oh,
you know,
trust me, I do. I think
yeah, like,
about all the time I'm spending doing that.
yeah, I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't doing all these things. I'm sure there's people that, read more, watch more movies, but, I don't know. I'm like compelled to do everything at once always. Yeah, I don't know. This is my first time. So I came into his office at a really weird time. I don't know what normal is there. Like
Hmm.
there's no normal for me. So I think we have a few key issues that we're excited to work on. The environment, Great Lakes is definitely a big one for the Assemblyman. Um, and so those things will start to play out. And, from my understanding, like we start planning now for what kind of legislation and work we want to do, right? So now's the time from now to, let's say, January, when we go back into session, it's researching things and proposing bills maybe, or that type of thing. But it's all very brand new for me. So I guess
You're about
I'm,
to find out, really.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you
yeah.
know that like a lot of the groundwork is laid between now and January.
Yeah. So it's like getting ready, and then January comes and normally you would go to Albany and go to session and that will probably be different this year as, like the whole time I've been with them, session wasn't normal.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
it'll be interesting, I guess. I'm excited to see what the year looks like, and to not having to be thinking about reelection and campaigning and stuff also.
yeah.
So
You're one of the few people who, when you say the election, you're not talking about the presidential election.
it was funny, like during that time, like everyone's stressed and anxious and excited for to be over. And I remember like saying it to a few friends. I'm like, oh, I'm so excited for the election to be over. And they're like, I know. And I'm like, no, I mean, like it's just like a whole different, there's so much
My
stuff.
election.
Yeah. Or like, it's, do you have a job? Like think of all the people that were up for reelection. That's everyone in their office is their job is pending on that. So it's
Yeah,
that stuff's all an interesting world that I don't think a lot of people think about. There's a lot of people on the other side of that stuff. So
I
yeah, but I'm
definitely,
excited.
I definitely think a lot of people don't think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, it's a weird time for sure. There's a lot of controversial things happening. Nobody is happy about being stuck in this pandemic. I for one would like to stop living in this pandemic and start moving past it, but I'm not even entirely sure how we know how we do that. We wear masks and follow some rules and look for some leadership with that, but hopefully that will come.
hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully.
So
So I have one more question.
yeah.
So you seem like you're obviously a very you obviously somebody who has a lot of empathy. I also think it seems like you have a lot of modesty too. However, I know I've like kind of sat up at the bar and drank my coffee with you and like picked your brain about certain things, and I think you have a lot of advice to give as somebody who is active in politics, and has run a business for a long time, not just your photography business. I mean, I should say not just the coffee shop, but also the photography business. I think right now, what this pandemic is doing is it's forcing people to reevaluate things. It's also putting people in corners where maybe they've lost a job or some opportunities are closed off, and now there are fewer ways to go besides, or maybe some of their only options left are, I'm gonna start my own thing, whatever that thing may be. I feel like um, oftentimes, like, what do they say? It's like adversity is the mother of innovation, right? And I think that's
Right.
true for a lot of things, and I think that's true for people. And you saw a lot of startups come out of the Great Recession in 2008 and nine, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen here, but you see with more people making content and trying new things, that is a spirit of the age right now, is experimentation, and that may translate itself to entrepreneurship as well. And so, as somebody who's in the middle of it and who's done it, what advice would you have for people, you know, trying to start their own business right now?
Yeah, I think, I guess overall it's like don't be afraid to try, which I know is like, we do stuff like that all the time, but I think that's the thing that stands in people's way the most, right? It's like that and trying to perfect everything before you move the ball forward. And from my experience, we just constantly pivoted and changed and fine-tuned everything as we went along. So I think it's like really sitting down and thinking about what you want to do, and then when that doubt kicks in, it's like, why not you, right? Like that's what I always say to people, like, why can't you do this? And so running a business and owning a business and starting a business, I mean, you've done these things. It's hard, but it's hard in the way that you expect it to be. It's time consuming. You don't necessarily have a paycheck to count on, so the dependability is gone. Those things are all those are like the measured things, right? Like those are the things you expect going into it. Um, so, it's like I think not being afraid to try and not being afraid to fail. Like, so realistically, if we don't make it through this pandemic and my business closes, like in some people's eyes, that probably means we failed, right? Like Undergrounds failed. But we also ran a business successfully for 4.5 years before that. So like, in what sense, who gets to define what is success and what is failure, right? And so for me, I think trying is success and taking that step. And I think that's the only thing that separates people that can and can't. I mean, obviously there's like socioeconomic and access to money and that kind of thing. Like that's a huge factor and all that stuff. And I don't want to negate that. Like, I don't want to like be all like bright eyed and bushy tailed and like, if you just try, you can do anything you
Yeah,
want. Because
yeah.
there are limitations, right? That you face from a real perspective on like paying bills and getting rent and finding someone to believe in you when no one else does. Like we didn't have a traditional bank loan to start Undergrounds because they didn't believe that my 2007 Jeep Liberty and my camera equipment meant, like that's not collateral to a bank, and that's all I had to show for myself at the time. So we kind of created our own thing and got private investors and went around and just asked anyone that might have a little extra money if they're interested in investing in this idea that we had. And without those people, we wouldn't be here, So it's you have to be a little unconventional, especially in a time like right now, right? Like banks, traditional banks they're not lining up to give people money because it's, everything's so uncertain. So I think just having the confidence to take the step and knowing that if that doesn't work out, like it, who cares? You're way ahead of everyone else who hasn't tried yet, right? And I often find that the most critical people are the people who've never actually done anything. You will rarely find somebody that's like tried or started their own businesses and that is just like constantly coming down on you and
So
telling
Teddy
you what.
Roosevelt quote:
Yeah.
"It is not the
Um
critic that counts. It's not the one who points out how the doer of deeds could have done them better," and so on and so
yeah.
forth.
Right. Yeah. And I find that to be 100% true. Like I think like that kind of stuff, you'll get used to it. Like there's always going to be somebody that just doesn't like what you're doing or doesn't like how you're doing it. And that's okay. And, I try and keep an ear open to that stuff to see if there's anything I can pull out of that I need to hear. And then the part I don't need, I just kind of throw away usually.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you face that a lot running like pretty public social media accounts, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's, that part was tough for me in the beginning. It's like just accepting that you're doing stuff that not everyone's gonna like, and that's okay, like we're all different in that sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think overall it's just like taking the risk, and like, or if you're not ready to take the risk, like put yourself in conversations with people that have taken the risk, and like put yourself in situations that'll educate you or give you experience to move to the next step. Like, I don't know. I worked in a photography studio in New York City where, excuse me, everyone was always super eager to share their knowledge. And the idea was that, like, I have a talent, right? So even if I share my knowledge with you, you don't take my talent away,
Yeah.
right? So it's like the
It's not a
more,
zero sum game.
yeah. So like I grew up in a very, like, professionally in a very nurturing environment. And so I don't, for me, that's like, there's pure joy in that, right? Just being able to like share things, and watching someone kind of blossom just because you shared a few things that with them. So yeah, and I think you'll notice, like, I feel like even in this pandemic, like I've seen a few new coffee shops open up, like I've seen new business. So like, what kind of balls does it take to open a brand new business in the middle of a pandemic, right? So I hope that we see a ton of people kind of follow their dreams. It's also kind of like you get to that you have nothing to lose point, right? Like, for people, like, we've lost our job, like, I don't know, we don't know where our next rent payment's coming from, right? So
Yeah,
when
by the way, that old steady paycheck, how steady is that anymore?
I mean, right? Yeah, I don't
That might be the bigger risk.
yeah. I think that was always my fear, right? That you pour yourself into like 40 years that, like, well, like, obviously Bethlehem Steel isn't really like the thing anymore, but when we were kids, like, that's all you ever heard of, like, right? If Bethlehem Steel hadn't closed, Buffalo would still be great. And it's like, so you spend 20, 25, 30 years, and then that company sells out right before you're ready to retire or something. Like, there are no guarantees like that in life anymore. And so I think that's the cool thing for me. I know that, like, if I need to, I'll get a job. I mean, I did, like, when I first moved back from New York, I was a janitor at a school for a little while at night because I wanted to do photography all day long, and I didn't want to have to stress and like try and fit different things in. And that job paid my bills, and it gave me, like, it didn't take my energy away, right? Like, I went in, I listened to podcasts while I was cleaning. I know that when it comes down to it, I will always take a job to pay my bills if I need to, and that'll lead me to like the next thing that I'm doing, that's like, my career or my business or whatever. But I think, pride and ego get in the way of a lot of things, and I try to check those things a lot because it's like,
Yeah.
we're very fortunate right now with the business and the customers we have, but that could change at any minute for any amount of reasons, right? Like, I mean, there was a point during the pandemic where we were having a hard time getting coffee. We had to find some new coffee purveyors for our green beans. But like, if I hadn't been able to, like, that would have changed our whole business model essentially. And so you have to kind of always be ready for those things. Like, there is no guarantee in life.
Yeah. I love so much about what you just said. A couple things, couple thoughts that are triggered. One is a friend of mine who I've also had on here. He didn't talk about it on his episode, but I know that his dad had a saying. It was his dad or his grandpa, something to the effect of like, you can always just go sell apples on the corner. And the
Yeah.
it was like, you know, the worst thing that could happen is never the worst thing that can happen. And
Right.
you can always find a way. You can always take the job to make the money to make the ends meet, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
like if you're secure in that, go give it a shot.
Yeah. Then everything else is, it's like, obviously, like, you have a wife and three kids. Like, you can't go out and take like a $10, or, well, it's 11 or $12 an hour job now, and sustain your lifestyle, right? So like, the risk is different for different people. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
frozen. Okay.
No,
Right.
that is true.
Yeah. So like, it's you can take all that stuff with a grain of salt. Like, when I started the coffee shop, I lived a pretty sum zero life, right? Like, I had to pay my rent, like I had an old car that was paid for. I was used to living off a minimal amount of money. I have no problem not having cable. Like, I like to travel, so I would always spend my money more towards those things rather than, I'm not so like, I don't own a house, and I know that's a big thing for a lot of people. It's not for me. Like, if it happens, that's cool, but it's not on my bucket list as like a must have, you know? And so I think it's accepting and changing priorities too. Like, if you want to do these big things or bigger things, what are you willing to maybe move away for a while or give up for a while? And
Yeah.
there, because there's always something, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think too, like when you're like the biggest thing I think when you're starting a business is you got to ask for help. Like, we built a lot of what we have on the backs of like our friends and our family being generous and like working events for us. And, like during the pandemic, having family members that would come up once in a while and like jump behind the counter when we didn't have any staff there and it started to get a little busier. Like you have to be able to like I think that's a big thing in life. Like if people offer you help, like believe them, right? Like you have to believe, and like maybe not everyone's sincere in what they're offering you, but you'll find out very quickly if you ask them. So
Mhm.
like, I think that's just something if somebody tells me that they're going to give me something or do something for me or like do something for the community center or my neighborhood, like if you don't ask that person, you're never going to know if they're real or not, and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think just having conversations too, start talking about things and you'll weirdly start to connect to other people that are in the same space as you in a way.
What I normally do when I finish these episodes, I put the full one on YouTube, and then I pull the audio and push it out to a bunch of streaming platforms like Spotify and whatnot.
Cool.
But I feel like I have to cut this last like 5 or 10 minutes where I asked you about starting a business because there's just so much good stuff in there. You hit on so many things, and one of the things that I really loved was just like the active doing and putting yourself out there, because that's what this podcast is, to be honest. I started it the beginning of COVID because COVID hit and I'm like, oh, there's never going to be a better time. I'm
Yeah,
never going to have more excuses removed. I have
right.
to do this now. So I just started recording chats and I called it CJ's podcast in
Yeah,
finger quotes, because I'm like, is this even a podcast, or am I just like recording Zoom chats and throwing it out? Like, how I felt even weird calling it a podcast.
yeah,
And I guess I still do a little bit, but I didn't even have a name or a strategy. And then I finally
right,
came up with the name is the Fling, right? Because
right.
it's the thing that you do, not because you have an end game or a strategy or whatever, but it's fun and exciting, and that's the only reason you need for doing it. And while
Right.
I realize that that's a luxury I have for this project that a lot of people don't have with their careers, I certainly don't have it for my business. You know,
Yeah,
in fact, it's because I spend too much time. Everything has to be planful and purposeful. That like I want a different outlet. So I
right.
realize it's not the same as starting a business, but the initiative, right? Betting on yourself, putting yourself out there, and trying.
Yeah,
That's really what this. That's the one common theme is I want to connect with people who are putting themselves out there in some way. My friend who plays in a band, great. Like do that. Starting a business, a coffee shop, working in politics, doing murals, whatever. Like that's
yeah,
I love people who want to put themselves and their work and their passions out there. So
yeah.
we could probably chat longer,
Probably.
and I wish I had more time, but we don't. But you are a fantastic guest, and I can't wait
Thank
to
you.
share with you and everybody else all of this stuff. I think I'll have to make some extra cuts.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Cool. Tell your
Okay.
friends. If you know
I
anybody
will.
else, I'm always looking for guests.
Oh, I could send you about 5 people. I'll message you.
Really? All right. Sounds good.
All
All right.
right, see you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.